Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Come and eat. Listen diligently to me, and eat what is good, and let your soul...
Praise the Lord. Well, we want to focus on a little detail, a little minor detail in the Scriptures. Here in the book of Exodus, Shemot, which is the Hebrew name for Exodus, chapter 9. As I have been studying the Bible now for going on 50 years, not quite, about 46 years every day, I am amazed at the little details in the Scriptures. They keep popping out. And, you know, why is that in there? Why is that in there? And you wonder, and then years down the road you find out why that is in there. Because this piece of information was needed for something over here that was written by another author in another book hundreds of years later. Wow. I see that all the time in the Bible, which causes me to continually marvel at, you know, it says in... what is it, Psalm 133? We are fearfully and wonderfully made. David was talking about, I think that's, well, it was 139, there it is. Yeah, the anti-abortion scripture. Well, the Scriptures are fearfully and wonderfully made. And why people would turn to the Book of Mormon, or the Quran, or any other books that have been written that are supposed to be addendums to the Bible, why they would turn to the Talmud or the book of Enoch or the book of Jasher, which are not even the original ones. You know, we don't have the originals. Or any of these others, the writings of the Buddhists or the Hindus or the whatever religion. It baffles me, because nothing at all, and I'm not an expert on these other books, but I can just tell you, nothing can even come close to the Bible. Which is why the Bible has been published and promulgated more than any book, and the Bible, the religion of the Bible, has had more converts than any other religion. It's not because Christian missionaries are smarter or better than anything, it's because the Bible is, yes. The Bible is the Bible. You know, I read the Quran a few years ago, and I'll tell you, talk about a hodgepodge piece of crapola. I had a hard time getting through it. It's very thin. It's not very thick compared to the Bible. It was so demonic, and it's twisted the Scriptures. It twists Christianity, and it borrows from a lot of the pagan religions, like Gnosticism and especially Greek dualism and some of the. I mean, it's just a hodgepodge of all kinds of stuff, and there's no continuity. There's no. It's just the sayings of a deranged man. It's the sayings of I'll call it demon-possessed pedophile. And make my day. Come and firebomb my house or whatever you want. But you got to get through the blood of Yeshua. And you got to get through the Spirit, and you got to get through the warring Malachim to get to me. And I really don't care. And that's before you get to my personal defense weapon that I carry on me. But my number one is the blood of Yeshua. The blood of Yeshua, and Yeshua, the King of Kings, who sits on the right hand, who is going to literally throw the spirit of Antichrist in all of its manifestations into the fiery pit. So the Bible is just incredible, and we're going to talk a little bit about one of the little verses, just a fragment of a verse. What does it have to do with? And we find this in Exodus 9, verse 31. Exodus 9, verse 31. And this is talking about, this is in the midst of the plagues that were being the Elohim's judgment upon the nation of Egypt. And this is the the seventh plague of hail, which is in chapter 9. And it says here in verse 31, now the flax and the barley were struck by the hailstones. You know, when hail, I'm a horticulturalist. I'm an expert. I'm a professional. This is what I do. I've been doing it for 40 or more years. And when hail hits leaves of plants, it can beat it down and it can also put holes in it depending on the size of the hail and the velocity of it. It can do a lot of damage to crops and to all kinds of things. So it says, now the flax and the barley were struck with the hail. For the barley was in the head, and the flax was in the bud. And the wheat and the spelt were not struck, for they are late crops. This was happening before Passover. Remember, Passover comes a few verses later. This was happening in Egypt. And Egypt and in the Nile River Delta area, or up in that area, where that's where the children of Israel lived, in the land of Goshen. And that's due west of the Holy Land, due west of the land, what became known as the land of Israel. So it's the same geographical region, the same latitude and longitude and all that. They're just several hundred miles apart. They're very close to each other and on the same, I guess it would be longitude. Well, barley is an early crop. Wheat is a late crop. Barley comes ripe around in the early spring. In the land of Israel, it comes ripe around March or April, whereas wheat takes longer to germinate, and it comes ripe in around Pentecost. So that's going to be around in June, usually in June, late May or early June, right in there. This is when it comes ripe in the land of Israel. So that's why I said the barley was in the head and the flax was in the bud. So these were agricultural people, and these, for people that know agriculture, they can pinpoint what the time of the year is by these statements. And it says, and the wheat and the spelt. Spelt is a cousin of wheat. It's very similar to wheat. Was not struck, for they are late crops. In other words, it was hit, but it was in a grassy state. Hail doesn't really affect grass that much, but you get big hailstones coming down on brittle crops of grain. It can break the crops because the grain is brittle, the stalks are brittle, and they don't bend like a blade of grass does when something hits it. You know, you can hit, you can take a baseball bat to a blade of grass, and unless you grind it into the ground, it probably is not going to hurt it that much. But you take a baseball bat to hit it, with a stick or something, wheat that's in a field that's golden color, and you're going to break it. And so anyway, that's what we're talking about here. So it says the barley was in the head. The word head there is it's a Hebrew word. It means Abib, A-B-I-B, or some say Aviv, A-V-I-V. It can be either way. And this gives us a clue about something. If we only had this passage, we would say, oh, well, this is just an interesting little coincidence or a little anecdote, anecdotal statement or something. Just a little background information. But like I said at the beginning, this piece of information ties in with other pieces of information that we will see that are mentioned elsewhere in the scriptures. And when you link them all together, it gives us a picture. So, there are several passages, only about 9 places where this word Abib, this Hebrew word Abib, is used. It's not used very much. In fact, I think almost all of them are in the Torah, which I believe they are. And maybe it's only 6 references. Take my glasses off so I can read. Let's go over to Deuteronomy 16, verse 1. This is the second reference to Abib that I want to bring your attention to.
Deuteronomy what?
16, verse 1. Deuteronomy 16, 1. And it says, observe, this is Elohim talking to the children of Israel, observe the month of the Abib, and keep the Passover unto your Elohim. For in the month of the Abib, Yehovah your Elohim brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. As I said, Abib means green in the head. Maybe I didn't say that. I don't remember if I did or not. But the word Abib is a Hebrew word. It means green in the head or in the ear. The barley was still green. It was not ready for harvest yet. It was almost ready for harvest, but it still had moisture. Look, you can go online and you can look up barley and you can look up the stages of barley. Barley is raised in many countries, including the United States. And there's about, I want to say, I don't remember, I don't have my notes in front of me, but there's like about 8 or 9 stages of barley. In fact, there's a scale. And I forget what they call the scale. It's called the, I don't remember that. But there's actually a scale. You go online and it's agronomists, people that raise crops, have established a scale. So they can tell how ripe barley is. And the green in the ear state is a stage. Because when you're raising barley, like any other crop, you have to do certain things at certain times. You maybe have to water, irrigate it. You may have to put down some herbicides, or not herbicides, but pesticides. You have to do certain things to care for it so it will come to fruition and bear a crop. You don't just, look, farmers don't just plant stuff in the ground and walk away. You don't just plant an apple tree in the ground and walk away. The apple trees, you've got to spray them. You've got your dormant sprays. You've got oil. You've got fungicides. You've got to prune them. You've got to spray them. You've got to in the summertime. That's in the winter and the spring. I know because I do it. And then in the summertime, farmers are constantly out there spraying their apple trees for apple maggot and for codling moth. Otherwise, you get apples with all of the wormholes in them and all that. You don't just plant a tree. You'll get apples, but they're going to be small because you didn't prune them. They're going to be dropping off because the tree maybe isn't fertilized properly. They're going to have scabs on them, and maybe you have aphids and mites and things because you didn't spray them. They're going to have wormholes in them because you didn't deal with the moths and the maggots and the flies that get in there and eat the apples. So when you get an apple in the store, it looks nice because somebody's cared for that all along the way. It's the same thing with barley. So they have this scale, and so. Abib is one stage in that scale. It's like there's like 11 stages, and it's like 9 or 10. It's right up to the top. So it's almost ready for harvest, but not quite. In other words, it is the barley is in the head. Just imagine a wheat head, because a wheat head looks, a head with all the grains in it, looks very similar to barley. They're very similar. In fact, experts could tell them apart, but I probably couldn't if I were to look at one or the other, and I've looked at both, and I probably couldn't. But an expert would, an agronomist, or somebody that raises it. But the Abib state is almost ready to harvest, but there's a lot of flesh in each individual kernel, but there is moisture in there. Why do you not want to harvest it when it's moist? Because it will mold, and also if you harvest it and then you try to grind it, the moisture in the in the head, in the kernel, is going to gum up your grinding stones. Those of us that grind our own flour, we know what that's like. You don't want to get any moisture in any of your flour, otherwise it will gum up your stones. And you're going to have a hard time, because stones are what does the grinding. And I'll tell you what it's like. It's like you got snow tires, and you're trying to get some traction out there on the snow or in the mud. And then let's say on the mud. I'm in mud a lot. Those of you that have four-wheel drives and you go four-wheeling. Let's say your traction tires. You're out four-wheeling with your mud. You got mudders on your truck or something, and you get your tires all gummed up with mud, and it's the kind of mud that sticks in your tread and doesn't come out. Guess what? You don't have any traction. That's why you want to get your tires going really fast to kick that mud out and go blasting through that mud. A lot of fun, isn't it, Bob? when you go about, yeah. So you get mud all over the place. But anyway, that's what the pores in the stone are like. They crush and they grind the grain and they cut the grain. But when it gets filled up with this gum, they're useless. Okay, so that's a little bit about Abib Barley. So here we see in Deuteronomy 16 verse 1, it's called the month of the Abib. Now, in the biblical calendar, there's 12 months. Just like in our Gregorian calendar, we have 12 months. The biblical calendar starts in the spring, not on January 1st, but it starts in the spring. But there are 12 months. The months do not have names except the first month. Now, there are some months like Nisan, which is another name for the first month, and Tishri and Tammuz, but those names were borrowed from Babylon. Okay? Just like we have pagan names in January, February, March, those are all pagan names. Well, the Jews brought in pagan names for some of their months, and they got used to calling them that. But the Bible itself doesn't name any months except the first month. And it's called the month of the Abib. The month of the green in the ear. Literally what it means. Well, what crop was coming ripe in the spring before Passover? Only the barley. You go to the land of Israel. I've been to Israel at that time. That's the only grain crop that is coming ripe at that time of the year. The wheat is still got a couple months to go. It's still in the grass stage. So this is giving us a clue. He's calling it the month of the Abib because that's when the first month of the biblical calendar starts, is when the barley is ripe. It's that simple. There's nothing else that's ripe at that time. I want to make this very clear. This is really very simple. Children should be able to understand this. So it's called the month. Definite article, the month. Why is it important to know when the first month in the biblical calendar is? It's very important to know. Because Exodus 12 verse 2 says, this is the beginning of the year. This begins the biblical year. You need to know when the biblical year begins, because then you can figure out when the biblical feasts come. Oh, yeah. Otherwise, you won't know. Look at it. If we didn't know when January 1st was, look at all the holidays we have in our country. You wouldn't know when July 4th was, or Groundhog Day, or Valentine's Day, or April Fool's Day, or Christmas, or Easter, or Thanksgiving or Memorial Day. People wouldn't know when to take their vacations. They wouldn't know, so we know, New Year's Day is a holiday because it begins the year, and people can set their calendars by it and all that. It's the same thing. I'm trying to make this really easy to understand because people get really confused about the biblical calendar thing. And they get really, really mixed up. And I'm trying to make it real simple. So I'm using analogies here so we can relate to it in our daily culture. Anyway, so that's why Elohim, what he called, this was the one month that the Bible names, and he names it after the month of when the barley is green in the head or green in the ear. the ear, the head of the stalk there, where the kernels are. So we have the definite mark, and so we need to know when the biblical year begins. Now, there's several other places where the term Abib is used, and we see it in Exodus 13, verse 4, and I'll just quote this: "This day came you out in the month of the Abib." So he's talking to the children of Israel. They came out of Egypt. The Exodus happened in the month of the Abib, the first month of the biblical year. And then go to Exodus 23:15. "You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread." That's one of the biblical feasts that falls right after Passover. "7 days you shall eat unleavened bread as I commanded you in the time of the month Abib, for in it you came out from Egypt, and none shall appear me before empty." In other words, you're to bring your tithes and offerings, your festival offerings, as Elohim has blessed you. So here he's saying, again, you came out of Egypt, and it's when the Passover and unleavened bread are taking place, which happened in the first month of the biblical year, which happens right around March or April, depending, it varies from year to year. And then the final reference we have is Exodus 34:18. It says, "The feast of unleavened bread you shall keep. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, in the time of the month of Abib, for in the month you came out of Egypt." This is just a restatement of what we just read in Exodus 23:15. So the word Abib is found only 6 times in the Bible. And in the King James Version, it's translated as, it means in the green, or means in the ear, or green ears of grain. That's what it means. That's how it's translated in the King James. I'm reading here from the New King James, and it says it was in the head. That's really, I don't like this translation. This is not a good translation. I like the green in the ear. What's that?
It appears 8 times.
Oh, 8 times?
Yeah, well,
twice in one verse.
twice in 2 verses.
Yeah, okay, great. It appears in 6 verses 8 times. Thank you, Edward. And so I like the translation. It's more precise agriculturally, green in the ear. And we'll see the significance as we go on. So I want to read what the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, which is a lexicon, which is one of the better ones out there, that gives you the definition. And I'm going to read what they say the word Abib means. I quote, "This noun refers to barley that is already ripe, but still soft, the grains of which are eaten either rubbed or roasted." They roast it in order to get the moisture out of it, so it's crunchy. It's called parching it. The ASV and RSV, American Standard Version, and the Revised Standard Versions, which are knockoffs of the King James Version that came about in the early 1900s, if I remember, agree, but see Leviticus 2:14. "The 7th plague brought ruinous hail upon Egypt's barley crop at least 2 weeks before it was fully ripened and ready for harvest." Exodus 9:31, which we read about during the plague of hail. Abib was also the early name, later it was called the month of Nisan, of the first month of the Jewish calendar, the month of Passover. In that month, the barley came to ear, but the usual time of harvest was the 2nd month, or the month of Iyar. According to Leviticus 2:14, the grain offering was to consist of first fruits, or the Abib. So, the barley being in its Abib, or green in the ear state, eliminates the guesswork, which, well, let me just back up. In the Bible, all the months begin with the visible sighting of the new moon. It's called Rosh Chodesh, or the head of the month. And the word Kodesh, or Chodesh, to pronounce it properly, literally means, it's a word that means month, and it relates specifically, if you look at all the lexicons and all the histories going back in ancient Judaism, it refers to the it refers to the first visible sliver or crescent, the very first day it appears. And that, it's a sign in the heavens, a sign, an ot, O-W-T, the Hebrew word literally means a visible sign. That's what the word means. So it's a visible sign that they could see, and they knew that that was the beginning of the month. So, the question is, which month, which new moon do we start our biblical calendar in? It's the moon that's closest to when the barley is Abib. So here we have two signs that indicate to us when the biblical new year starts, so we can properly calculate all the biblical feasts from that point on. It's when the first thing they looked for, before they even looked for the visible new moon, they looked for the barley that was Abib. And trust me, barley grows all over the land of Israel. It grows like dandelions, like weeds. It grows up in the Galilee. It grows in the Jordan Valley. It grows on the Temple Mount and on the Mount of Olives. It grows down by Tel Aviv. It grows in the Negev. It's literally ubiquitous. It grows in the Judean wilderness. It grows in the desert. Wherever there's a little bit of water, it will grow. It doesn't need a lot of water to grow. I have seen it with my own eyes. I have traveled the land of Israel, and I've seen the barley literally. There's fields of it, they cultivate it, but a lot of it's growing along the road. Literally along the highway, you can see it. And it's coming ripe at that time of the year. It's not hard to spot barley anywhere in the land of Israel. Some places it comes riper sooner than other times because there's different elevations and climates in the land of Israel. But the point is, and I'm not going to get on, that's a whole other discussion. But the point I want to make is, Elohim said, he called it the month of the Abib because that month began when the barley was Abib. So they would look for the barley that was green in the ear, not ready for harvest, but green in the ear at that stage of its development. And when it was green in the ear, so that they could actually parch it, put it in the oven where it would dry out and the moisture would evaporate, and then they could eat it. Because, okay, why would that be necessary? Eat it and grind it into flour. Why would that be necessary? Why is that important? I'll tell you why. For those of us that can go down to the local grocery store and get stuff any time of the year, we can get tomatoes and grapes. Even when we're not growing, even when in the middle of the winter, when there aren't grapes and tomatoes growing in the Willamette Valley, we can get them, or even in California, they can be shipped in from the southern hemisphere, Chile or Peru or so, I don't know, but you know, Mexico or wherever. But in the land of Israel, in ancient times, they didn't have trucks and airplanes to be able to bring food in. They didn't have refrigeration. The only food they had is what they preserved and what they were able to keep. That's the only food that they had. And the food was, they would run out of food. They would run out of food. Jared, go lock that door, please. That's supposed to be locked. It's killed it, but it's supposed to be locked. We keep the door locked all the time. Don't unlock it, please. He's a friend, but I don't want people walking in here. Anyway, so just imagine you're in the land of Israel and the fall harvest comes and you get all your grapes in, you get your olives, you get your wheat, you get all these things. And you've got to dry it, you've got to smoke it. They didn't have canning. You've got to turn it into wine. That's what they drank because grape juice wouldn't preserve. And that's what they ate all year. And then, of course, they had their livestock and that kind of thing. But by the time you get into the spring, you're getting down on your stores, aren't you? You have maybe you're getting tired of eating those dried figs and those raisins, those dried grapes and the dates. And maybe your wheat stocks are getting a little bit low. and maybe you're getting tired of eating dried olives and olive oil, and maybe you're running low. And the barley is the first, and that's all you've been having, morning, noon, and night are those things. And you don't want to kill off your flocks, and you only butcher your sheep or your goats when there's a party or a festival, because you kill something, you got to eat it all up. You can't keep it in the refrigerator or keep it in the freezer. So you got to put yourself in the culture of that time, okay? And when the spring came along, and the very first crop came ripe in the land of Israel, and it was the barley, they were excited because now they were going to get some fresh food, and it was going to supplement their stores, which by now were running low, and they were getting tired of. And imagine some fresh bread cooked. Any of you that grew up on a farm that made your own bread? I tell you, when Mom ground the grain in the grinder, and then she would mix up the dough, and that's what I grew up on, was homemade bread. And she'd make it once a week, like 5 or 6 loaves of whole wheat bread, and she'd knead that, and she'd put it there in the bread pans, and then she'd let it sit there, and it would come up, and she'd beat it back down again, and then eventually she put it into the stove, and it was just right, got the room temperature, whatever. And then when that fresh bread came out, it's like, you've all been bakeries. Our kitchen was a bakery. And then when it's just hot out of the oven, and a little butter and honey, because we made our own butter too. We had a butter churn, and we got milk from the raw milk bed, and dairy, and so we churned our own butter, so we had fresh homemade butter, and we had our own beehives, so we had our own honey. So everything was homemade. And there was few things that were as yummy as that. So this is what the Israelites were looking forward to. So if they could harvest some of that grain while it was not quite harvestable, but it had enough meat in the ear where they could dry it over the fire and cook that moisture out of it and get it so it's dry and all the moisture out of it, so then they could grind it without gumming up their stone grinding wheels and make it into flour. Can you imagine? It's been about 6 months now since you harvested your last crops, or almost, about 6 months. You imagine how good that bread will taste. And I go to all these details to help you to understand the importance of the barley and the month of the Abib. And having grown up on a farm, having an agricultural background, I can understand that. And having been to Israel, and I can understand that and studied the culture and traveled, it makes sense to me. That's why I'm giving you this background. So this is when the new year starts. This is when it starts. It's in the month of the Abib. Now, I'm not going to get into any further on the biblical calendar. I've got several articles on our website on the biblical calendar at hoshanarabbah.org. You can go on the teachings page and look up teaching articles, and there's articles there under the biblical festivals or feast day or Moedim heading, and you'll see several articles I've done where I go into more detail into other things, aspects of the biblical calendar. I'm not going to go into that. I've also done a video on that. It's on this YouTube channel. But I want to just focus on the Abib Barley. The Abib Barley. And the importance of it, and why this little detail is in the scriptures, and why it is clear that Elohim was using this as the signal or the sign or the indication when the new month, the new year, and the first month begins. All right? Good. I hope that's clear, and thank you for listening. Amen.
Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon his name. He is near, he is near, he is near. Yeshu Hashem be'ir matzov kerabu yoto karov. Yasov Rasha darko Yishavim machshevotav Yashovel ad Hashem beis Yeshua Hashem behimatzo kerahu yota karo Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon his name. He is near, he is near. Yeshua Hashem behimatzo kerahu